Hi everyone and welcome to Bradford Science Festival. My name is Sofia and I work at the University of Bradford. Today I'll be giving a talk about terrible termites, lousy locusts and other pests from around the world that can cause massive damage to our environment. So I have a background in entomology, which is the study of insects and pest control. I hope you enjoy the talk and I will be around to answer any questions after the session. So what are environmental pests? A pest is defined as any animal or plant that's harmful to humans or human concerns. So this can include damage to our food crops, livestock, property, home, buildings, and some insects are classified as environmental pests because they invade our personal homes and they bite us or they sting us, they contaminate our food, pass disease, cause damage to our homes, as I mentioned before. But there's a whole nother genre of pest, other pests that cause billions of pounds worth of damage all over the world and can cause real problems to our food supply. And pests range from insects like murder hornets that we saw earlier this year, deadly arthropods like black widows, mammals that can spread disease such as mice and rats, and even mollusks like snails in your garden. So in today's talk, I'll be focusing on a few key insect pests, how they cause harm and damage, and ways in which scientists have come up with to control them. So let's start with these critters, terrible termites. Termites are these tiny little insects, they're smaller than ants, and they're amongst the most successful insects on Earth. Did you know if you weighed all the termites in the world, it would weigh more than all the humans combined? And they're amazing little creatures, highly successful, and in the wild they're actually really useful because they break down dead wood and mulch, and they have natural predators like birds and ants that keep their populations under control. But termites have realised it's much easier for them to feed inside a home where there's no predators and plenty of dead wood because homes use loads of timber in their construction. And they can cause a lot of damage, particularly in the US, where there's estimates that say they cause $5 billion worth of damage every year. So let's talk a little bit about the biology of these insects. They're small, they're social, and they come in colonies. Now, these colonies range from a few hundred individuals to massive colonies with millions and millions of individuals. And, they have a really complex social structure. They have three different types of members or castes in their society. These are workers, soldiers, and reproductives. Now, the workers make up 95% of the colony. They build nests and tunnels, they forage for food. They're normally the ones that are causing the damage to buildings and to homes. And these are the ones that they collect the food and they feed the young as well by regurgitating that. The soldier termites protect the colony, and then on top of that, there's the breeding males and females, and they're called kings and queens. So the whole society chip in to raise their young, as I said before. Termite queens are particularly fascinating, if you ask me, and they're amazing little creatures. They actually lay one egg every second, and they can lay 24 hours a day without a break. They also live really long. I mean, it's unbelievable to think they can live up to 50 years, some termite queens. So they're really fascinating little insects. And there's actually over 2,000 species of termites. One of the worst ones that are environmental pests to humans is the subterranean species. So subterranean termites live in large colonies under the ground, and they're the most destructive type of termite, which is not unexpected considering they eat wood 24 hours a day. And generally, colonies have around 40,000 individuals, which sounds like a lot, but there actually have been cases of super colonies with 70 million termites living in them. And the way that they get up from the ground to your homes is by these little tunnels. They're called mud tubes. And the workers build these from mud, saliva, and their own feces as protected entry points and tunnels from the ground to wherever they've decided that that's their next food supply. And once they've made these are protective shelters for them to travel in between. And this is why one of the first places people look for termite infestations is in the foundation of their homes, because the termites come from the ground up. So not only do they cost billions of dollars to control, but they actually cause serious damage, like these two homes that the foundations have been damaged and the whole home has fallen down. Once upon a time, it would have been highly unlikely that damage to your home in the UK would have been caused by termites, because generally they're pests of warmer parts of the world. However, they are spreading northwards, and often they're introduced into our environment through imported goods. This is the type of damage they cause. So how exactly can we control them? Obviously, they cause a lot of damage, and obviously, as soon as people see any sign of a termite, they're going to call pest control. And they want to stop massive destruction to their building or their home. They want to stop their home from falling down. So there's a few different methods. Firstly, in areas that are known to have termites, buildings are built with physical barriers in place, treated wood to stop them from even entering. You also get something called a termite bait station, and they lure the termites in and they dispose of them. However, most of the time, once an infestation has been found, the house will be sprayed with an insecticide, which kills the termites. Our next insect invader is the infamous locust. They have plagued humans throughout history for thousands of years, and they are personally one of my favourite insects to learn about. They're closely related to grasshoppers, and they form enormous swarms that devour entire crops. Historically, there have been reports of them causing mass migration and famine. So let's talk a little bit about the biology of the locust. They mostly live like grasshoppers. They lead a solitary life and they're pretty harmless. However, there is a certain specific set of conditions that cause locusts to swarm. And it all starts with a dry spell. The locusts are forced together in areas where there's still food for them to eat. This sudden crowding of the locusts means that they start to release serotonin. This is known as the happy chemical. So they start to become more sociable, more energetic, they're hanging out, and they start to try new foods, they have more of a varied appetite. And after the dry spell, when the rains return, so does the vegetation and the food, and this creates a perfect storm. The locusts notice there's loads of food, and because they're in this happy, sociable mood, they begin to reproduce. They lay their eggs in the damp soil, and they rapidly multiply in numbers, becoming even more crowded. This phase is called the gregarious phase, and this is the phase where locusts swarm. And that's to be expected because the food supply rapidly runs out under the pressure of that many locusts. As you can see from the diagram, the shift from solitary to social can actually give them a physical change in colour. But not only that, they seem to get superpowers, their brains increase in size, and they just get a boost of endurance. The scientist who first discovered this shift in 1921 was a Russian entomologist, and he actually corrected people because people thought these were different species of locusts at that time, before they figured out that this is a shift in the locust that happens because of certain environmental conditions. So this is what those particular conditions can lead to: massive swarms of locusts, and they have endurance and they have speed and voracious appetites, eating their way through crops. Swarms like this can swell to the size of 70 billion insects and destroy 300 million pounds of crops in a single day. Some swarms have actually been measured 460 square miles. And it's unbelievable how much ground they can cover, eating their way through crops. And a great example of some of these amazing feats is that in 1988, there were reports of locusts that travelled from West Africa all the way to the Caribbean on favourable winds. And they were reported to travel those 3,100 miles in just 10 days. So as you can see, it's really important that locusts are kept under control. In our modern age, monitoring locust populations has become easier and easier with modern technology, and these plagues have generally declined. However, early this year in the spring, desert locusts were spotted in some African countries that have not seen these pests for nearly 80 years. And this is due to the perfect conditions we discussed earlier being present. One report said that there was a swarm with 100 to 200 billion locusts. And this is really a dangerous situation because 10 million people in the affected area already faced food shortages before this occurred. So generally, locust swarms are monitored through GPS, satellite, and field reports, and that leads to pesticide spraying, either with aircrafts or with tractors. There are also other methods of control as well, though. During a recent outbreak, a fungus species which produced a toxin that kills the locust was used in Somalia to control the outbreak. This is called a biopesticide and is much more environmentally friendly than the normal chemicals. There are also a lot of scientists who are figuring out ways to genetically manipulate locusts. A method called gene drive has been used in mosquitoes to slow the spread of malaria, which is a deadly disease. This method stops the reproductive cycle of the insect and therefore decreases the population size, but this technology could actually be applied to locusts, and scientists are looking into that. So next up, I want to talk about this insect, the fiendish flea. They're tiny blood-sucking insects and they live on a host. This insect is particularly close to my heart because I studied it for many, many years and I had more flea bites than I would care to share. So there are many different species of flea, but one of the most important and abundant is the cat flea. Contrary to its name, it doesn't just affect cats, but also dogs. And those of you that have a furry friend in your home will no doubt have come across these pesky little insects. Now, cat fleas don't just cause itchiness and distress to our pets and to us as pet owners. Untreated infestations can actually make animals really, really sick. They can cause anemia in young animals, they can transmit disease and worms, they can cause allergic reactions and dermatitis as well. So let's talk a little bit about the biology of the cat flea. This diagram shows a full metamorphosis. It's a 4-stage life cycle that a lot of insects go through. So for the flea, the adult flea spends most of the time on your dog or cat, and they can live up to 2 years as an adult. Once a female finds a host, she starts laying eggs within 2 days. And the eggs that are laid by that female, they fall off the cat or the dog into the environment along with flea dirt, which is flea excrement. That's all the regurgitated blood that they've been drinking from their host. This flea dirt provides a really, really good source of food for the flea larvae when they hatch from their eggs. The larvae hatch in as little as 2 days and they're typically found wherever cats and dogs spend a lot of time, so particularly in their beds. And the larvae are photophobic. That means they dislike light and they tend to move deep into the carpets or the soft furnishings and people don't really see them. So once the larvae grow, they develop into pupae. Now, pupae are encased in a sticky cocoon and the adult flea develops inside the cocoon and it awaits a sign before it emerges. This is one of the most interesting things about fleas, if you ask me. Inside the cocoon, the flea waits to hear vibration or moisture or noise or carbon dioxide, and these signs let it know that there's something living out there, something that it can live on and feed off. And the most amazing thing is they can actually stay inside the cocoon for 2 years. So you may have thought you've got rid of your flea infestation, and then all of a sudden 2 years later, this flea can emerge and it can cause a whole fresh new infestation for you to deal with. But generally, in the right conditions, the whole life cycle of the flea can be completed in as little as 15 days. This helps to explain why these parasites are so successful. For effective control, adult fleas on the cat have to be killed and reinfestation from the environment has to be prevented. So how can we control fleas and stop them from taking over our homes? One of the simplest ways is mechanical, vacuuming your home regularly. But if an infestation has taken hold, it's highly likely some sort of chemical control is required. That can be in the form of treating the animal or treating your home. As I mentioned before, the cocoon can be really resistant to treatment, so sometimes it can take a while to get rid of any infestations. One really cool way scientists have come up with to control fleas is with something called an insect development inhibitor. So we saw the life cycle in the previous slide. These chemicals, they help prevent immature fleas from maturing or they stop them from reproducing, and that can cut off their life cycle essentially. So next up, and a bit closer to home, is these insect moths. Now, before I studied insects, I probably wouldn't have ever thought of moths as pests, but actually many moths can be major pests in agriculture because the caterpillars they eat and they really damage the crops. Our next pest is this little guy in the picture, the diamondback moth. It's less than 1 centimetre big, but the diamondback moth is actually one of the most destructive crop pests in the whole world. A few years ago, in 2016, it was all over the news that this small moth, called the diamondback moth, was coming across the English Channel in massive swarms to lay their eggs, and then the caterpillars would eat through all of our crops. One of the biggest fears that year would be that there were no Brussels sprouts for Christmas dinner, and many, many articles mentioned this, because diamondback moths are pests of brassica vegetables, and that includes not only Brussels sprouts, but cabbage, cauliflower, and broccoli. Interestingly, they're really not very good flyers, but because they're so small and light, they can be easily carried by the wind. And as you can see from some of these headlines, they've been referred to as super pests. But why exactly was there such an uproar in the media? Well, the uproar was because of these little guys. So the diamondback moth undergoes a full metamorphosis. That means they have a 4-stage life cycle. And in stage 1, they go from a small tiny egg and they hatch into a caterpillar. This is when they cause the damage, because the caterpillar burrows through the leaves and it can strip whole plants very, very quickly. And just like the hungry caterpillar, once they're fully grown, they form a cocoon and they pupate, normally stuck to the underside of a leaf. After 5 or 10 days, the adult moth emerges. The adults lay their eggs in young cruciferous plants, and although it might not be life-changing for there to be a lack of sprouts in the UK, for example, it can have a massive impact on the countries like China, where Chinese cabbage represent the country's most significant vegetable crop. And there's also a massive financial impact for farmers because these pests actually damage over £1 billion worth of crops each year. One of the things that makes them the most successful pest of agriculture is resistance, because not only are they a global pest, they can be found all over the world, but they're resistant to a lot of chemicals and pesticides that normally work. So what does resistant mean? It means that when a farmer sprays, like in this image, it doesn't work. The insect continues to damage their crops, and it formed a really, really big part of my research career. And one of the most interesting things about resistance is the way in which insects evolve and develop it. So insects have a really much quicker reproductive cycle than we do, and that means they can fast forward and establish certain traits. For example, one way the diamondback moth becomes resistant to chemicals that farmers might use is by changing its genetic code. A single change in its DNA means that these chemicals no longer work. So what happens is one of these insects will develop this change, and it will live and it will reproduce, and its kids will live because these traits are passed on, and soon that trait spreads out throughout the entire population and you get a resistant population. This can happen in a matter of months in an insect, whereas it would take generations for animals that have a longer reproductive cycle. So that's just a brief rundown of what I think are some of the most interesting or worst environmental pests. I love studying insects because there's so much more to them than meets the eye. They have social hierarchies, they have so many amazing features and adaptations. And if you'd like to know more about insects and find other links and ways in which you can learn, you can visit the virtual STEM Hub on the University of Bradford. And I hope you enjoy the rest of Bradford Science Festival. Thank you.